Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Secrets of Flow. I'm Alexey Zheglov speaking live from Toronto, Canada. Today is November 19th, it's Tuesday, 12 o'clock noon in US and Canada Eastern Time Zone. That's the weekly time. This is your weekly time and place for insights and practical advice about improving the world of work. When I say the world of work, I mean, to be more accurate, the 21st century kind of work, creative, intellectual, and invisible. Because the work is inside your brain largely. You think to earn a living. Does that describe you well? Would you like to spend more of your working hours in that seemingly effortless, yet productive, the deeply satisfying yet elusive state of flow? I'm here for you during this hour. Or maybe you lead other people doing this kind of work or teams and you want to make it flow. Well, that's a difficult job to do because the work is invisible. It's very difficult to see how it's moving. And this hour is for you as well. Or maybe you run a business that tries to satisfy picky customers with somewhat uncertain results of such work. That's pretty difficult too, and I'm here for you during this hour as well. And sometimes business leaders like you and managers who work for you need a trusted advisor. And maybe you already have one. And I know some people who are watching today are in this kind of trade, giving advice. And if you're looking for some fresh ideas about that, I'm here for you as well. Folks, we have a big topic today. I chose the title and the topic for today's episode, How to Map Your Process. So we'll figure out some ways how to give more transparency, how this invisible work moves end to end from some idea or let's say customer request all the way to delivery. It's a pretty big topic, so I'll make just one small announcement. Tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, local time in Toronto, KanbanTO, that's our regional Kanban method community, will have its regular, roughly monthly meeting. And today we have a great guest speaker. It's Mike Bowler. He'll be talking about pulling great data and metrics out of work management tools that people don't really like. And he'll be showing off some new tooling that he created around this problem. So that will be tonight at 7. We'll also have some community discussion, and that will be facilitated by my colleague, Kanban expert, Fernando Cuenca. So let's talk about mapping the process. I'm gonna talk to you about 3 kinds of things. So obviously I'm gonna have to show some examples. So I will be sharing my work screen with various diagrams from time to time. However, please don't feel like you have to follow slide by slide. This is not a webinar. Don't worry if you miss a little bit. I'll come back to that concept at one point or another. And also after the end of this episode, which I intend to finish at around 55 minutes, so you have some changeover time if you need to go to, let's say, your next meeting at work, or let's say you have some important activities that starts in the next hour, you will have that time. So this is not a webinar, don't feel like you have to follow very closely. There will be some content on the screen, like diagrams, and I will certainly have to show you that. A number of examples of processes mapped in various types of work and industries, with some useful takeaways. I will also have to go back from time to time to sort of the method. Okay, like, so you just showed me an example, but how do I do it in my process? What are the common concepts here that I can take out of this example and apply? How did other people apply these concepts in their own situations? So we'll talk about that too. And I also want to talk about the third kind of thing, which is, okay, well, mapping the process from here to there is not an end in itself, right? It's a useful tool, but you probably want to use it in conjunction with other things, okay? So how does it fit, let's say, a broader context of what you're trying to do in your modern workplace or in your business? And how does it fit with perhaps other, with a certain improvement method that you are applying, whatever it is for you? And depending on your role, where you are in your company, the leader, manager, team lead, one of the employees, and so on, where do you fit in this picture? Where do you fit in the picture of a process? What does it mean to you if, let's say, you see some of your work in that diagram? What do you do practically in that? So, again, examples, method, and some context. So 3 types of things that I will try to cover today. Folks, please do use chat or comments to ask questions. Please do let me know where you're listening from. I know some people did it without a reminder, and it's great to hear from you. Toronto, Saskatoon, Austin, thank you so much. This means a lot to me and energizes me, as you can see on my face right now. So let's get to it without any further introductions. All right, so I want to start with an example right away. No theory. And this example comes from someone named Tom, and you know, people use this phrase, it was a pleasure to work with this individual. And I should say that in my, let's say, independent working career as a trainer, consultant, coach, author, I met a lot of people, and Tom is near the top of the list in terms of like deserving this kind of praise. It was really a pleasure working with him. So Tom drew a diagram that I'm about to show you in a couple of minutes. I just first to have to say a few things for the context. What's Tom's business? Tom is in the business that can be described as training and courseware. He leads a group in his company that develops training courses for customers, and then they deliver training courses. What are these courses about? Well, they are about how to use some complicated equipment, hardware, software, and integrated solutions that Tom's companies makes and customers buy. Now, customers want to be super users of this stuff, and they request training courses that Tom develops for them and then delivers. So Tom's group develops courseware, they maintain a portfolio of courses, and they also actually deliver them. So, after some training and some consultation and one-on-one and questions and answers, Tom drew this diagram of the process for me. I should say, actually, one more thing before I show it to you. What you may be looking at here is perhaps a photo of, let's say, a whiteboard when Tom drew it, kind of the authentic image. All right, here I have to reset some of the expectations. I cannot really show you that picture, and actually that picture wouldn't really help us much. Well, first of all, that picture wouldn't be of very good quality. The writing on that whiteboard made in relatively thin marker, maybe without enough contrast, that wouldn't be a very readable picture. Also, about 80% in that picture would probably be some details that are important to Tom and his company, and part of that must be kept private. But also part of that isn't truly relevant to the method we're talking about here. How do I actually do this in my own process, right? And frankly, those 80%, most of it is not even any of my business. However, the other 20%, they are important because they show us some really important lessons that we can take away from the art that Tom created. And so I cleaned up that picture using my kind of cleaned up graphical notation, so the picture is much easier to read. And okay, I'm finally gonna show it to you. So, all right, here it is. So Tom's process of producing a training course involves 5 stages. I'm not going to read them one by one, they are quite obvious. What I find it interesting in this picture is that it shows how information and knowledge accumulates over time. Time is on the horizontal axis, that's how it progresses. And on the vertical axis, we have the amount of information and knowledge that is being created. We find some facts and we do instructional design and drafting, beta testing, publishing. Okay, I read those 5 things. So the knowledge accumulates, and those curved dark blue arrows show us the accumulation of knowledge. What I find interesting in this diagram that it shows how very different groups of people have to collaborate in discovering this knowledge. The yellow figures over here, they represent Tom's department. It's the training department. However, it turns out in order to produce a training course, Tom has to use help from other teams and departments in the company. There could be someone from R&D who is an expert in how a particular piece of equipment works, well, because they designed the equipment. There could be some people from field engineering group and support who actually know how customers actually use the equipment in the field. There could be someone from documentation group involved, because documentation can possess some of the, let's say, important content that could be reused in a training course, and so on and so forth. So what I also find it interesting in this diagram that it describes relatively few stages of the process, namely 5. And this is a kind of cognitive dissonance that we developed in the Kanban community at the end of 2000s, maybe in the early 2010s, when this new method, this nascent worldwide movement of Kanban practitioners in various knowledge work fields tried to create visual Kanban boards visualizing some kind of knowledge work process end to end. And we found one interesting discrepancy, and it fascinated me from the start. How do we actually find what the stages of the process are? Well, if we could use some other process as an example, let's say you develop software and you have this 4-stage process for developing your software, and I develop software too, then maybe I have a very similar 4-stage process. So if you have a Kanban board with 4 columns, I may as well just reuse its structure. But what if the process is something else? So we had some decent advice from, let's say, the lean world, where we say, okay, we'll just follow the work. And so let's say there is a step in the process, we follow a piece of work across the factory, and various operations happen to that piece of work, various machines do the work, people pass it from one workstation to the next, and eventually the work is complete and leaves the factory. Well, I tried doing this. Actually, there's some work management systems that you can apply in a lot of companies that do invisible, intangible kind of work. And well, let's open one of the tickets and look at the log, at the history of it. Well, it turns out it often has dozens of entries. How somebody did this, and somebody did that, and then they assigned this piece of work to someone else, and then that person did something, and then the next person did something, and then somebody raised the problem, and somebody reassigned the problem, and somebody diagnosed the problem and solved it, and there's another thing. You read through these logs, and there's like literally dozens of activities. So if we try to follow all the handoffs, we should be visualizing dozens of activities. But the reality is we're not actually seeing those, let's say, 50-column Kanban boards in the field. Well, at least they don't survive contact with reality for very long. And all the successful implementations involve boards with maybe 3, 4, 5 columns, plus minus a few. So how does this happen? What's the secret? And the secret is that instead of trying to follow the piece of work through all the activities and handoffs, we try to follow how the knowledge and information are accumulated. So how do we go from a relatively poor state of knowledge to a richer state of knowledge when we have enough of knowledge and information that we can call this work item complete and deliver the result to the customer? And so this brings me to my second example, when I met kind of the person who gave me this example. So this example takes us to the heartland of the United States, the part of the country that some people call Rust Belt, which is the term I don't find very positive. But anyway, you may believe that all the jobs and factories making steel have moved somewhere else in the world, that the production is somewhere else, and people no longer really do this in this part of America. But it turns out that they actually do, and those who do it with increasing sophistication, and I got to meet one of these Americans. And we spoke about the process and how they're improving it, and John, I think was his name, described to me how they proposed some changes to the equipment in the factory, and they try to make the process safer or more efficient or improve some of the qualities of their output. And they sometimes reduce energy consumption or some other desirable characteristic. And so there is some back and forth process of proposing this change and then arguing about it, and then it goes up for approval, and sometimes it doesn't get approved, and then an engineer can resubmit it and maybe eventually gain the approval. And so John was talking to me about kind of the back and forth of this process. And at some point I asked him, okay, well, how far are you in your description of the process from the moment, from that end point that we both see somewhere on the right hand side of some future diagram, that this proposal is actually implemented and it is actually making some difference in your actual factory. And then John realized, okay, well, what I was just describing, let's just call it analysis. And what's the rest of the process? And that's when he drew a diagram that looks like this. I'm just gonna go to this frame and then go to the next frame. All right, so that's a diagram, and again, it shows relatively few major phases of the process, and again, we're not following the work here. We are following how the information is accumulated. Sure enough, some knowledge is gained by analysis, but you can't analyze your way to actually solving a problem. Then there is some engineering work to actually engineer the equipment change. This may involve some reprogramming of firmware that controls some of the factory equipment. And then comes a fascinating part. Turns out John's engineering group, he's the leader of that group, has a simulator, and then they can deploy the equipment change into the simulator and see what impact it makes. However, there's a diminishing returns to what you can learn by testing on a simulator. Eventually, you have to go to a live factory and test in the live factory. And now you can see kind of these color-coded figures in this diagram. They represent John's engineering group, which can do 2 of these 5 activities very much by themselves, but in 3 other activities they do have to collaborate with a whole bunch of other people in their company. So at some point you do have to go to live factory. And if that goes well, then you have to roll out this change, and that involves actually training the factory staff. It may involve occupational safety and so on and so forth. So this is, I love this example, because clearly the contrast between testing in the simulator and testing in the simulator and testing in the live factory when there's molten iron involved, if there ever was a contrast between 2 adjacent activities in the process, 2 clearly different modes of knowledge discovery. Folks, we are approaching kind of the midpoint of this show. Again, I thank everyone who is watching this live, and also if you're watching this as a recording, I will be posting this video with annotations of when everything was said and when every example was shown and when every key point was made, so that you can click on the timestamp and jump to it right away. For those watching live, if you have any comments or questions you'd like to post, please do so. I will try to address those before I run out of time. And now I wanted to kind of reflect on one of my old experiences that actually, when I started creating these process maps and testing the approach of following the work, of looking at changes in collaboration pattern. This was actually one of the processes that I used as an example to test the new method. So this is a situation from a startup where I worked a while ago in the early 2000s, and our product was internet advertising. So we were basically selling advertising on the internet. And every time we had some change to our platform, we'd approach the rollout kind of in three phases. First, we would deploy it to a very small population of users, usually like 0.1% or something like that, just to make sure we didn't break anything. So we ran actual statistical tests, basically show that two populations of users, given kind of two different versions of the product, but behave essentially the same, and there's no discernible difference between them. And that gave us some confidence, so we are a bit higher on the knowledge acquisition curve. The next phase was to measure improvement. So the update we just made to the platform should lead to, let's say, better targeting, which should yield more clicks that advertisers pay us more money for. And this is when we involve a different group of collaborators, some creative people to actually create those ads that perhaps weren't even possible with the previous platform. And this is when we would actually measure improvements. So the two segments of user base, given two different versions of the product, two different campaigns, would actually produce statistically discernible performances, right? So, and let's say at this point we validate that the new product is actually better. And once we were sure about that, we'd of course reach the point of full rollout, and then go to validation and update with the full customer base. This typically means figuring out how to incorporate the new technology into, let's say, daily operations of our ad portfolio, and how to translate that into better sales, because presumably new potential clients would like to buy something that they see as a product that gives them better performance. And now I want to ask you a tricky question. Let's go back to these diagrams and consider this. Let's say we took this three-phase process and created a simple three-column visual board and started tracking work. What do you think we'll find out pretty soon? Where is the bottleneck in this process? Oh, well, let's say we have a few new product ideas that we are testing over here. There is a really critical test of improvement going on over there. Well, the bottleneck is really here, all right? So it's on the uptake side. We have a whole bunch of things that are ready for this uptake, but we actually have to figure out how to incorporate this into daily operations, and this isn't actually going very fast. And what about John's process of improving the factory? Well, thing is, I don't really know, but it wouldn't be a surprise if, let's say, by tracking this actual work, John would see something like this. There is actually like the bottleneck somewhere in the later stages of the process. And the reason why this bottleneck exists is because in order to do anything in those later stages of the process, you actually need access to the factory. You need a special window when you can actually run these tests, and you need cooperation from a lot of people. And what about Tom's process? So let's say there's some work going on here, a number of work items, courses, or changes to existing courses in various stages of completion. Where do you think the work is more likely to be blocked? Well, I would say there's two phases in this 5-phase process where the blocks are least likely to occur because the work is contained within Tom's team. But what about this? What about this? This is like a lot of people are involved in this, and here as well. Oh, actually, off by one column here. Right? So these are all external dependencies. Dependencies that go outside Tom's team. And what's interesting about this is we can see that it's a different collaboration pattern in each of these 5 activities. It's like the work is done by a social network. It's a social network of your company that discovers knowledge. And in these 5 dominant activities, it's like 5 different subnets of this social network go to work. And each subnet has a different, can I use this word, topology? And a different topology results in a different pattern of delays. And so when the time comes to look at the, let's say, time metric of this process, we're not going to get into that today. But let's say it's the future time, we wanted to look at the time metric of this process. Basically, the pattern of that metric would incorporate the delays that are produced thanks to basically the shape of things in the diagram that we just saw. So a certain topology of the social network that goes to work to produce the knowledge produces delays of a certain pattern, and then we can see that pattern in the statistical distribution of the time metric. So if we were wondering, okay, so what are the causes of variation? Why does something takes longer or shorter amount of time, or why is the time in process unpredictable? Then a lot of clues would be in that particular process diagram, because it shows us where those delays may be hiding. All right, so after these examples, I should perhaps finally say something about the world of software, because these examples were from somewhere else. So let's go here. Just move forward a little bit. So what we often see in the software world is this sort of diagram. What I like to call the hot potato pattern. And this shows you the limitations of the approach of following the work and the handoffs right away. Because if we try to follow all the handoffs, we end up with a lot of backflows and a lot of arrows connecting the boxes in the diagram. So let's say we have these teams or people or departments or some kind of collaboration going on here, and let's say a very typical situation is that business analysts hand developers some requirements for a new software feature. Developers find some inconsistency or some logical contradiction. Requirement must be clarified. Then, okay, the code is developed. Then it goes to test, and the tester finds a bug. The developer says it's a feature. We need to clarify it. It goes back to analysts. And back and forth, and then the hot potato eventually crosses the finish line. If you try to visualize the process like this and track work using this kind of visualization, let's say this is a 4-column visual board in your, let's say, Jira, then you will find a lot of back and forth movement of cards, and it will be quite difficult to maintain focus, to maintain steady flow in this kind of process. However, we can take an alternative view of following the accumulation of knowledge through the dominant activities. And here we can see that most of these activities are quite collaborative. People from different specializations take part in them. But nevertheless, at some point specification, let's say, dominate. We analyze all sorts of use cases, and people who are not necessarily analysts can participate in it and give feedback. And then we mostly engineer the solution, and this is where a lot of coding happens, but a lot of feedback from people in other, let's say, functional disciplines is used, and so on and so forth, testing and deployment as well. And so let's say somewhere on our board we had on our eventual visual board, right, which we can easily turn this diagram into, we had, let's say, this separation between let's say engineering and testing. And let's say at some point a card representing a work item, let's say a new product feature, moved from here to here. This move basically signifies it's a code complete moment. Do we guarantee that the code is free of bugs? No. Of course there could be some bugs, and testing will likely find them. What do we do if we find a bug? Do we keep moving the card back and forth, just because it's some, let's say, software engineer who has to fix the bug? No, we don't have to. Because if we take the position that these 4 phases in the process, these are not 4 people tossing the hot potato, right? We are already past the code construction phase of our knowledge discovery. So we're clearly discovering knowledge by testing, right? And that means sometimes have to fix a bug. So we can simply put a blocker here, and at some point somebody who wrote the code, let's say this blue figure over here, will help fix the defect. Now we can remove this blocker, and now the item is unblocked and can potentially flow forward to development. So if we use the knowledge-centric approach to visualizing our process, we often don't have to move cards back and forth. So the flow is more straightforward, left to right, from start to finish. So that's kind of the usual answer to should cards go back and forth on a visual board or a Kanban board. So if you use the knowledge-centric approach, they usually don't have to go back, unless, let's say, we moved a card forward by mistake. Maybe we thought the code was complete, but it really wasn't, and so we just need to fix this mistake, or we need to take advantage of some new information that tells us it wasn't really complete. However, we don't need to move it back and forth. Some teams, some companies may not yet be ready to take this knowledge-centric approach. They prefer to see work moving as a series of handoffs. Well, in this case, you have to visualize handoffs, but please remember there is perhaps a better way, and you will find it eventually. So just to kind of summarize this, I'll just say this is kind of a generic diagram, something I just want to show you. Look for, actually I should, forgot to switch to the screen, here it is. So you should watch out for dominant activities, and there will be a few in your process, and the points between them are not really handoffs, they're just changes in the dominant activity and collaboration patterns. So look for a different activity means a different mode of knowledge acquisitions, or a significant shift in collaboration pattern, whereas you let's say, have a dependency on some expert group, or in this activity you really don't. Everything happens within the team. All right, in a few remaining minutes, I would like to say how this fits into, let's say, broader context of improvement and what you may be doing based on your role in the company. Those of you who are familiar or received some training in the Kanban method, or let's say Kanban Management Professional certification, you may have seen this, because this is kind of a pretty standard tool for how you map the workflow end to end, as part of designing a Kanban system using, let's say, the systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban, which goes by a catchy acronym, STATIC. What's interesting is that the mapping the process isn't the first step. And I wonder if, let's say, like, you may or may not like Kanban, you may want to use it or not, but regardless, is mapping the process something you should start with? And actually, like, we pondered this question in the Kanban community, and we found the answer quickly, and that was a number of years ago. It turns out no, there's some steps you should take first, and there's a really couple of important steps, and I would say they are, like, the importance of these two steps is universal. And you should take those steps regardless of your choice of improvement method and how you call it. So one of these steps has something to do with, now the Kanban term for this would be identify the work item types. So when you look at a realistic service, such as, let's say, Tom's courseware group, they usually face demand from multiple customer segments. They do different kinds of work, different kinds of deliverables. So, for example, for Tom's group, producing a new training course is just one type of work. Other types may involve updating an existing course. And they do it a lot because technology changes and they have to update their training material. They may need to update some exercises they run during their training courses. So it is important, and that's real work. But that work may follow a different process. It may not involve the same 5 stages, or those 5 stages may not have, even if some of them overlap with the new course development process, they may have a different collaboration pattern. Some specialists may not be needed. If we're designing a course anew, we may need their help. But if we're just making a little change here and there to keep it current, well, maybe we don't really need to involve these people anymore, or at least not to the same extent. So the 5 stages will show, perhaps, or perhaps it's not even 5 of them, some of them may not be needed. There will be a different combination of knowledge discovery activities and different collaboration patterns in each, even in those that overlap. And they also do training delivery, and that's clearly a very different type of work, and it follows a very different process as well. So, and we shouldn't apply the same structure of 5 columns and kind of try to shoehorn training delivery into the process that is used for courseware development. So knowing what your work item types are and practical takeaway from observing a lot of different processes in a lot of industries, that a realistic service or product group usually has a handful of different types of work, and you have to map the process differently for each because they will have different stages. Okay, so I shouldn't repeat myself. And that's one important step before you visualize the process. So you visualize the process of delivering what, and there are several kinds of what that you should identify first, and that's one important step. The second important step is in the context of Kanban and the system's thinking approach to introducing Kanban static, we like to call it sources of dissatisfaction. So finding, asking people around your company what they're currently not exactly happy with in the existing process, where they see some kind of improvement opportunities or points of frustration or failure. Maybe they're burnt out and overworked. Maybe customers are unhappy. Maybe the business isn't seeing the results they're expecting. There's some kind of gap. Whatever we do next, how we model the variety of the work coming into the process that we're modeling, how we see the sequence of dominant activities and collaboration patterns, what further steps we take with whatever improvement method we're applying. What we don't want to do with all these things is we want them to stick, right? So we want people in our company, or if you're a consultant and in your client company, to actually persevere with whatever improvement initiative we're starting, to actually see some improvement. And the trick to this is the improvement is more likely to stick if people doing it see it as, okay, this is solving my problem, or this has a good chance of solving my problem. So if they see it that way, they are more likely to actually follow along. If they don't see it, they're very likely to actually abandon it, right? So, but what's the problem? And that's the conversation we need to have at the very start. If we know what the problem is, then that at least increases the chance that whatever choices we make later about what particular improvement tools to apply, what improvement methods to use, and how, all of that has a greater chance of sticking, or at least some hope of sticking, right? And not being abandoned. So that's the context. And a few things about your role and where you can see yourself in this big picture. So I'm just gonna flash that diagram on the screen that shows Tom's process. So where you see yourself in this picture. So something I want to say about people who, let's say, lead teams. So the figures of different colors in this diagram aren't really people. These are groups of people, and in some cases, whole corporate departments. So this is a pretty large-scale collaboration that is happening here that reaches in a lot of different parts of the company. Quite possible, if we asked who is the lowest common boss of any of the two people that work in any of these 7 departments, the most likely answer it's the CEO of the company. So the so the big picture is actually quite big. It's bigger than your team. So it's very important to understand how your team, if you are the team lead, connects to other parts of this big picture, other teams, other corporate departments whose help you need from time to time in order to move your work forward, in order for it to flow, and how you maintain those work relationships so that when you need some expert on how this particular piece of equipment works, you actually know where to go, and they expect that you will come to them for help from time to time, and they're ready and happy to provide that help. Right? So how is this working relationship working? So the sooner you immerse yourself in understanding the web of organizational relationships that your team has, the better is it for your team and for your let's say performance as the leader of that team. If you are, let's say, a senior leader who actually oversees, presides over, is responsible for the outcomes of, let's say, a big chunk of this big picture, then an important takeaway is that the position where you say, okay, I've got a number of great teams and people really know how to do it and they work very well within those teams are well coached, facilitated, and whatnot. That should solve my problem. That position may be somewhat fragile because it leaves out the important quality of this overall process that actually the result is determined largely by how all these teams interact. Right? And so what policies may exist that govern this interaction? Are people actually encouraged to collaborate, cooperate, to go across various departmental and team boundaries in order to get help with their problem, in order to provide help to someone outside their, let's say, immediate team and so on? And as a senior leader, you may have something to ensure that that this sort of across the team, across department collaboration is actually working. If you are one of those, let's say, relatively narrow but very deep experts, let's say you're an expert in how to fine-tune database performance for a software application, or maybe you know how to fix every bit of lab equipment in, let's say, a life science company, or you know a lot about, let's say, privately identifiable information regulation, which actually affects how a lot of products in your company are designed and are supposed to function. If you are good at what you do, people find the path to your desk. They will look for your help, and it may be overwhelming at times because that you sometimes may face a deluge of requests coming from various departments of the company that ask you for advice. So managing those work relationships well and avoiding overburdening and figuring out how to give everyone what they need, that may be quite a difficult management job in itself. And of course, we have some solutions for that, and I may be talking about them in one of the future episodes. So, some examples, some theory and background and method, how you can do it in your own context, in your own industry, in your own company, and some advice on how this fits into bigger picture of your favorite improvement methods. Don't forget, mapping the process end to end isn't the only thing. There's some things to do before and after. And if you are a team lead, if you're an aero specialist, if you're a senior leader who has a say in how this big picture functions, I hope there was something for you in this fourth episode. of the secrets of flow that I'm now going to bring to conclusion. Thank you everyone for listening or watching, paying attention from time to time at the key moments. For those watching this as a recording, I will of course annotate the video with timestamps, and also if you watched it and you want to, let's say, forward this to your colleague, if you wait until after about 3 p.m. Eastern Time, those timestamp annotations will be ready and the video will be just a bit more watchable. And that's 55 minutes. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and best wishes to you for the rest of your work week. The next episode in 1 week, I will announce the topic tomorrow.